Isabella Maldonado, welcome to the show.
I'm really thrilled to be here.
All right. Now, when you were sitting in the academy classroom, I won't ask you how many years ago, did you did you ever think you would be retiring as a police captain, command staff?
Actually, in a weird way, I kind of did.
Okay.
I I went into my policing career in the same way I went into my writing career, and that is with all of the optimism of pure ignorance. I think that's really the best way to approach anything in life that, it's a very daunting thing to get promoted. It's a very daunting thing to get published. But if you're totally ignorant about how impossible it is, you just kind of charge ahead. And so, yeah, when I was in the academy, I was actually hoping that I would be the chief of police one day. I mean, that's how crazy I was. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, let's start at the beginning. Why law
Uh-huh.
enforcement? Why did you go into law enforcement?
Well, unlike a lot of people, I'm not a legacy. There is absolutely no one in my immediate family that had been in law enforcement at the time when I decided to go into it. The reason that I kind of went there is because I had thought that I wanted to be an attorney. And I even went so far as in my undergraduate work, I studied I took like a lot of pre-law stuff
Mm.
and because I was thinking that's what I wanted to do. And then I did an internship at a law firm in Fairfax. And it was a very high-powered law firm, very successful. And I don't mean to be offensive to all the attorneys out there, but some of these guys, I couldn't believe it. And I remember what kind of did it for me was I went and every once in a while I would be allowed to go, have an audience with the senior partner.
Mhm.
And, because I was obviously contemplating these things and whatever, the lowly intern. Anyway, so I was chatting with him one day and I asked him, because they did do some criminal work, they did all kinds of different work. And I said, what if you you're representing a client and you know that your client is guilty, and let's say he's done something horrible, like let's say he's like raped or murdered a child or something, I mean something horrible, and you find a technicality to get him off, and then he's able to go out and do it again. I'm like, how do you sleep at night? I really wanted to know.
Yeah.
And his answer was, um, well, I get in my Jaguar and I drive to my mansion and I, get in my gigantic California king size bed and I sleep very well. And that is when I knew that I didn't want to be a lawyer, at
Wow.
least not one in criminal defense. And because I thought, wow, and he was so successful. I mean, really successful, the Armani suit, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I'm like, if this is what it means to be successful in this kind of sense, then that's not what I want to do, because I want to be successful. But I learned at that moment that it's not all Perry Mason. You're not always got an innocent client that you're getting off. And I mean, God bless the attorneys who do that, but it's the other ones that I'm like, the guy was brilliant, but he was putting his brilliance to work in a way that I couldn't get on board with.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that because I've interviewed defense attorneys and I've known defense attorneys,
Mhm.
and their hearts are in the right place, whereas they are also defending the legal system. Everybody deserves a fair trial, no matter
Yeah.
what they look like, no matter where they're from. And I'm a huge, huge believer in that.
Mhm.
Even Jeffrey Dahmer
Mhm.
deserved a fair trial, even though everybody knew that what he did and how
Mhm.
horrible and just
Mhm.
despicable.
Yeah.
But in if we do away with that, then we're all a
Oh yeah.
bunch of vigilantes and
Yeah.
it's just going to go south really fast.
Yeah.
And
Agreed. Agreed.
but that whole greed thing really rears its ugly head,
Mhm.
and that gets really fuzzy, and it
Mhm.
just, like you were just saying, it just, wow, that just gets ugly. And the second part of what you just said, the internship, man, I can't promote that enough,
Mhm.
because you found out that, okay, I'm not going to waste a bunch of time and go through all this agony of going through law school and studying my butt off and going through all this and realize, okay, maybe this isn't for me. Where I had the opposite happen to me. I was in college. I did an internship with Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department, and I thought I died and went to heaven.
Ah,
I'm just like, wow, this is the best job ever. I love cop stuff. I
mhm.
had an inclination, but once you're like boots on the ground and you're actually doing it, you're just like, wow, this is
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. Internships are fantastic. And here's another thing, if you feel like, well, I'm too old for an internship, I'm not in the student age anymore, but I'm thinking about doing this, that, or the other thing. Actually, a fun story. My father, he worked he was a GSer. So he worked
Sure.
a government job inside the Beltway for his entire career. And then when he retired, he was at loose ends. And he's like, okay, now what am I going to do with the
Mhm.
rest, my golden years? What do I do?
Right.
And so at that point, what he did was he ended up volunteering, and that's a great way to experiment with different options
Mm.
too. And he ended up volunteering with the local historical society. And then there were some archaeologists there who needed some help with the history. So he went out and was helping them. And then he got involved with the archaeological society. And then they ended up, I guess I'll just cut to the chase and say, within a couple of years, he was actually working with the Smithsonian Institution
Oh, wow, cool.
as an archaeologist,
Wow.
going out with the curator of the museum on some of the most significant cases in the world.
Dang.
And that's after he retired. So you're never too old. And volunteering is another way where you can start by doing something like that. And then you never know where it's going to lead, but it's a great way to kind of get your feet wet and see what you like to do.
Well, your dad is almost like Indiana Jones, really.
Yeah, yeah, right.
You can tell, yeah, it's like you're pretty damn cool, you're like indie. That's super cool. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I love to hear stories like that. And I'm obviously most podcasters, book writers, whatever creativeness that you're doing, we're entrepreneurs really.
Mhm.
And I love listening to Tim Ferriss. I'm a big fan of his.
I am too. I listen to his
Yep.
podcasts.
Oh yeah, I'm a
I
big
do.
fan. And I've read all of his books,
Mhm.
and I've listened not to every podcast, but a pretty good chunk. And
Mhm.
talking about volunteerism, it struck a
Mhm.
chord with me what you were just saying, because he's a big believer in mentors and
Mhm.
contacting these people, and the way you do it
Yep.
is through volunteering.
Yes.
Don't
Yeah.
say, hey, you know what, you're an unknown, or you should really be paying me, $100,000 a year, and you should be listening to me, and you've got no cred.
Yeah.
He said he was working, like clearing off tables at events of people that he wanted to talk to. So
Mhm.
he'd catch them in the hallway, he'd catch them whatever, with very well thought out questions that were going to be very brief.
Mhm.
That's how he kind of like climbed that ladder. And again, that's just one more positive outcome from volunteering.
Well, that's after he was motivated. One of the things I love is how he talks about as a young man, he was like a slug, and he admits it. He's
Yeah.
like, I just kind of laid around. I had no motivation. I was going, my parents were afraid I was never going to make anything of myself. And then, and he's like, I was in love with this woman, and I had nothing to offer her and everything. And then it's like one day something clicked, and then he realized, you know what? No one's going to do this for me. I need to get off my butt and do it myself. And then he became this unstoppable machine that he is now. But I do find it interesting that he went through this whole kind of lethargic, as like in his late teens, early 20s and stuff. And he's like, it could have gone either way.
Yeah,
So I
he's
love
a
those stories too.
yeah, he's a very interesting guy. He learned to hack a lot of things.
Yes, he did.
Just yeah, just somebody who holds the Guinness World's Book record, I think, for mambo twirls or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he also won like a Chinese boxing match.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he did it was he looked at the rules, and the weigh-in is the day before. So he starved himself to make weight at a very lower weight than he ordinarily would.
Mm-hmm.
And then he just gorged himself after he got weighed. So he
Mhm.
was like almost 10, 15 pounds heavier than his opponent, which was
Mhm.
quite, that's substantial. And
Mhm.
one of the things in the rule book was there was nothing about throwing your opponent out of the ring. So he did that, and he won like some big championship by doing those two things. And I'm like,
Oh, it's funny.
that's hilarious. But anyways, back to law enforcement.
Yes.
So you're in college, you rule out the attorney thing.
Mhm.
Was the default going into police work?
Well, I don't know about the default, but what happened is when I was in college also, um, I was studying, I got exposed to being able to learn about psychology. And I ended up loving the subject, and I ended up taking several courses in psychology. It became my minor. And of the psychology courses, one of my very favorites was deviant psychology. That's what they called it back in those days.
Oh, okay.
Totally a politically incorrect term now. But that is literally what they called it. It was basically, just psychology of, study of people who are different from the norm. You're not in the bell curve. You're either on one side or the other of it. And as a project for a term paper for that course, I was partnered with a guy in the class, and we interviewed murderers. So we went to the local prison
Oh, wow. That's
where they
cool.
had murderers,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, as a female, they couldn't let me all the way back into their maximum security area. I know.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, my partner was a guy, so I was able to kind of walk right up to the point, but then I couldn't really go any further. It was too dangerous to say. I mean, and think about it. I was like, what, like a 20-year-old young woman?
Oh, yeah.
Imagine putting me in there with these guys that are just, they're all like homicidal. And yeah, that would have been a horrible nightmare. And they're like, no, there is no way we're letting you back there. So he had to actually conduct the interview. You recorded it and everything, but
Mm,
and I helped sort of parse it all.
yeah.
But it was absolutely fascinating. Right then and there, I knew that the criminal mind fascinated me. It was very interesting. I learned a lot from all that. And then I just, kept studying more and more from there. And so I didn't end up, I thought, well, if I'm not going to work in the law as a lawyer, what's another option where I can still do the law? And I thought, well, applied law. Police work is kind of like applied law.
Hmm.
Plus, you get to shoot guns and drive real fast. And I like those things.
Yeah.
So it seems like a good idea.
Yeah. So you went applying for police jobs when you graduated for college, or when you were
Yeah.
in college, or what'd that look like?
Shortly after I graduated, I was not in college. I didn't put it all together until a little while after.
Okay.
Um, I did try like a regular office career, and that was another thing that I learned is that I hate being stuck in an office. At least, back in those days, I really couldn't stand it in my early 20s.
Sure.
I just couldn't take like the cubicle farm or whatever. I'm like, I can't stand it. I'm going to slowly go insane. And so I thought I have to have something that, so then that was another thing. I thought, okay, I can get a lot of fresh outdoors and all these other things and everything. So it worked.
So did you get hired by a specific police department and then go to their academy, or did you go to like academy at a vocational school and then try to find a job, or what that look like?
Well, I was in, I had been born and raised and grew up in Northern Virginia. And so I applied to I wanted to work on a large department. I didn't want to
Mhm.
work on a little small one. I don't know how, but instinctively, I just felt like that wouldn't be a good choice for me. I don't know why, but I did. So I applied for the two largest departments in the state of Virginia. Actually, the largest one is the Fairfax County Police Department. That's larger than the state police.
Okay.
And then I also applied for the state police. So I only applied for those two because I wanted a large department. And Fairfax County got back to me faster. And so I went with them. That's really was kind of it.
I find it interesting. It's not a sheriff's department, it's a police department.
Yes. Now there is a Fairfax County. Okay, this is kind of fun.
It is
There is a
confusing, yeah.
Fairfax County Sheriff's Office. There is. There
Okay.
is also a Fairfax County Police Department. And then there's also a Fairfax City Police Department.
Oh, that's not confusing at all.
I know. And you're in when you're in Fairfax City, within the confines of that city, you know, everybody's got jurisdiction in that one location. But Fairfax City is actually very, very small. There's only like, I think they only have like a 50-person department. I mean, they're very small. But they just patrol the city, which is like less than 5 square miles. I mean, it's like a small area.
Yeah.
It's kind of the seat of the county there.
Okay.
You know, the county is much larger. The county is 400 square miles, and the county has a population of 1.2 million people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the county is quite large.
Yeah. So I'm guessing the sheriff did most of the jail stuff and courts,
Yes.
and the police did the policey stuff, you know, going out there and enforcing law, you know, doing traffic stuff and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. You got it. That's it.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, not too many departments are split up like that.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. So you start out like we all start out as a police officer, and you know, you're on training, and then you rose through the ranks. Did you raise through the ranks pretty quickly, or what did that look like?
Actually, not really. It's funny because back when I first came on, they allowed you to take the sergeant's test with 2 years on.
With
You
only
know,
2?
well, but don't worry, that changed.
Wow.
I did take an attempt at it with 2 years on, and it did not go well. I mean, you just don't know enough.
No.
But what happened is a couple of people managed to do well, and of course they called them 2-year wonders, and they started getting you know, promoted and stuff. It was such a disaster. These people were such poor leaders that they actually changed the rules, and you weren't even allowed to take the test now unless you have 5 years on. That's fair. Like the bare minimum.
Yeah,
now
that's
for
fair.
me, I did not end up getting promoted the first time to sergeant until I had 8 years on. Yeah. So I felt like at that point I had enough experience, and and of those 8 years, I had 6 years in patrol, and then 2 years as an instructor at the police academy. So, you know, I felt like I had a good foundation under me as to, you know, what is expected and what to do. And so getting promoted to sergeant at 8 years was really good. And from then it did go a lot faster, because it's almost like once you had a really solid foundation and you kind of knew how to take tests and you knew what to do, and your work ethic was really good, you could get promoted a lot faster.
So you were on the street as a police officer and as a sergeant. Now, as like where I worked, you know, seniority was king when it came to what shift you worked. So if you're a brand new sergeant, you know, you're kicked back to nights, which would either be midnight to 8 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon to 11 at night. Did you have something like that happen to you? Oh
yeah, exactly the same thing. And here's the thing. Here's why that can be very, very stupid and short-sighted. Okay, because I got promoted to sergeant, and yes, I did. You know, you have your training period as a sergeant, and then you end up on midnights as a sergeant. And then when I got promoted to second lieutenant, we had second lieutenant and first lieutenant on our department. When I got promoted to second, that's still, it's called well, back in those days, we called it a gray shirt. So it's still considered like, you know, like a line supervisor at that point. I had a squad of my own at that point, and I had 2 sergeants under me and a squad when I was a second lieutenant. But so yeah, as soon as I got promoted to second lieutenant, they kicked me back to midnight. Well, guess what? I got 2 brand new promoted sergeants under me.
Yep.
I know, how stupid is that? Okay, so here you have it. You have the midnight shift where our police precincts were commanded by captains. They work regular hours, so the captain is not there. The assistant commander was a first lieutenant. The first lieutenant's not there because it's the midnight shift. So you're the second lieutenant. You are the highest ranking person in the middle of the night, and you just got promoted 5 minutes ago. and the two sergeants under you just got promoted 5 minutes ago, and there's no one else above you. I mean, like, how stupid is that? It's really it's just dumb. So it's really a trial by fire.
Right. But you have to think on your feet too. You know,
Yes.
I have nothing but admiration and respect for people who work midnight to 8 because it completely destroys your body. You don't know which end
Yes.
is up. The pressures on your family are
Ugh.
enormous. And now, where were you in life? Were you married? Did you have kids? I mean, what did that look like when all this is
Well,
going on?
actually, I mean, at that point, it was kind of funny because I was like, the when I first, okay, I had to back up a little bit because
Okay.
I actually had a shift that every cop I talked to cannot believe that our department did this. I'll be curious to know if you even heard of a department that does this.
Okay.
Um, so when I first came on, we had steady shifts, and I was assigned to the swing shift because apparently that was like the least desirable. I worked from like 2 p.m. to I think it was like 1 a.m. And apparently nobody wanted that because like you can't have any kind of family life at all or whatever. People would rather days or nights. But anyway, that's as a rookie, that's what I got. But I was happy with it because as a rookie, I'm like, I don't care. I'm single. Who cares? I don't have
Right.
a family. I'm not worried about it, whatever. But with a year later, some genius, no doubt in the accounting department, some bean counter on our department, figured out that they could save money by putting us all on rotating shifts.
Oh God.
Exactly. Okay, so get this, for those who don't know, this is how our shift works. So you would work 4 days of day shift, and then you'd get like a 2 day break, and then you'd work 4 days of evening shift, and you get like a 3 day break, and then you work 4 days of midnight shift, and then you get like another 2 or 3 day break, and then you go back to day shift. So literally your body is constantly being thrown out of whack. I describe it, and I worked that for 5 years. That was like most of the time I was in patrol. And I describe it to people like this: I felt like I had the flu for 5 years.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like. It
Yeah.
was horrible. And our union didn't have any teeth. It's like no one could do anything about it. Management loved it. They thought, oh, this is great. We're saving all this money because you'd be required to do all your court appearances during your day shift.
Oh, okay,
See what I'm
gotcha.
saying? See what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah. Yep.
And it's like, and then the overtime and stuff, it was just like it minimized the overtime dramatically. It slashed the overtime. It was horrible. And at the time, I had gotten married, and they ended up, and again, unbelievable, but this is actually true. They put my husband and I on opposite shifts. So we both rotated, and we literally had 1 day off a month together. That is it. And we were always working opposite. So when one of us was at work, the other one was at home, and we literally never saw each other. Is it a huge surprise that that marriage ended in like a year? No, it's not.
Well, it's funny you
Yeah,
mentioned that, and I'm not making light of what happened to
yeah,
you,
yeah.
but our first day of the academy, and I've told this story before, somebody's up there and it's like, okay, in Wisconsin, the divorce rate is 50%. You got a 50-50 chance of making it if you get married. Okay, congratulations. You're all cops now. So guess what? Now the divorce rate for you is like 70-80%. And
Yeah.
he said, if you're stupid enough to marry another cop, now it's 90%.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I'm
Mm,
just like, 90? I
yeah.
thought that, it's like you can understand, each other a little bit better. I thought, whatever. And I caught him. I think it was either in the hallway. I probably didn't raise my hand. I don't even remember. And I'm like, I can't believe this. And he said, think about it. He said, all you do is talk about cop shit. He said, you know what? You need a break from it. You need to have some normalcy in your life. You need to have other friends that are not cops, and maybe even a spouse that's not a cop.
Mhm.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, I never thought of it like that. And I'm like, Well, I was married at the time, but of course, that wound up going south, because, again, we're talking about shift work, the rotating shift. I don't know what evil genius, thought that up, because obviously they never did it, because
Yes.
it is that horrible. Midnight to 8, I did that for 13 years between being a police officer and a sergeant. And I literally felt like, you said you feel like you have the flu. I felt like I was dying. I felt like I was hungover without the fun of the night before. It was
Right.
just horrible.
Right.
But so,
Did you ever wake up to the sound of your tires hitting the gravel as you're driving home?
oh
Because I
God, oh Lord, I fell asleep one
yes.
time going to work. I did that a few times, and I'm like,
Oh,
holy shit, where am I? How did that happen? And I'm like, oh God, and I'm
right.
just, and
Or
I can't.
you get to the precinct and you have no recollection of how you got there.
Oh, all
Yeah,
day
that,
long.
yeah.
Or my personal favorite was I'd make it home and I'd fall asleep in the driveway of my house.
Ah,
And there'd be dog walkers, going by knocking on my window. Are you okay, officer? Are you okay? I'm like, I'm staring out into nothing. I'm like, where am I? I don't even know.
yes.
Oh
Yeah.
God.
It's really unfair. And actually, you know what happened to another officer? It didn't happen to me, but it's a fabulous story. He was working, in these rotating shifts. And at some point, he didn't even really, he parked so that he could sit and write his paperwork up. The next thing you know, he wakes up and under the windshield wiper is his lieutenant's business card. Whoa, talk about the pucker factor.
Well,
Yeah.
one of my old partners, that guy, he was probably one of the hardest working people I've ever met in my life, because he would work midnight to 8 with me as a partner. And then his dad owned a rental store. They'd rent out like power equipment, they'd rent out, power tools, even like wedding tents, whatever. And he'd do that till 4 in the evening, and then he'd go to bed. And he was married and he had kids. And one time he didn't show up for work. And my sergeant's like, "Hey, O'Donnell, you want to call your partner and find out where he is?" I'm like, "Yes, sir." So I call and his wife answers the phone. It's like 12:05 or 12:10. I'm like, "Yeah, is Mark coming into work tonight?" "Yeah, he fell asleep in the shower again." I mean,
Oh
like,
no.
and I'm like, "He falls
Oh,
asleep standing up in the shower." She said he does it all the time.
oh my,
Horses do that. I didn't know people do that, but
I
horses
did.
do.
Wow. It's amazing he didn't slip and kill himself.
I know. Yeah.
Goodness, or drown. Ugh,
Yeah, I
awful.
could I could tell you many stories about that,
Yes.
but oh my
Yeah.
god. So, balancing the home life,
Mhm.
police work, pressure. I mean, obviously, you said that marriage didn't go very far. As you spent more time in the department, did things get any better? Or did you learn how to deal with it a little bit better? Or
You know, not not so not so much really.
okay,
It took a long, long time to I would say meet Mr. Right to find the right person.
sure,
It took decades, and so I ended up having a family late in life because of that.
yeah,
Being in my career, I was very career oriented, and so I was focused on that, and especially being when I was finally made captain. Um, one of the things one of the positions I had at one point, I was a precinct commander. At another point, I was commander of special investigations and forensics. But I was on call 24/7 and 365
yeah.
days a year. And so you're constantly rushing around, and it's not conducive to any kind of social life. But finally, I met the right one. And but it turns out that he lived on the other side of the country in Phoenix.
Oh
He was
my.
a police commander in Phoenix.
Okay,
So it was kind of like a decision point, but I finally realized that I actually wanted to have a family. It was a little late in life, but I thought, well, so I took a little bit of an early retirement. I retired with 22 years on instead of 25.
okay,
But, but if I was going to have a child, it's like I was running out of time, to
sure,
have one myself. And that's what I was going to do. So I did decide to take the early retirement. That's how I ended up in Phoenix, which is where I am now. Got married, had a child, and sort of went into that mode. But I guess for me, I never could find the balance, because when I was on the job, I can't imagine myself being a mom when I was on the job. I know other women did it. And as a matter of fact, several of the women on my department pulled me aside and they're like, are you sure you're really a rising star? And
Yeah.
actually my chief even called me and said, you know what, you're next up for major. Are you coming back off maternity leave or not? I need to know, because I'm going to promote you if you come back
Okay.
to major. And that's like, that's just like two below the chief's rank. I
Yeah.
was right there. He's like, you're number one on the list. And it was a gut-wrenching decision to make, but I had just had my child and I was like, yikes. But a lot of the other women are like, hey, just get a nanny or get an au pair or do whatever. And but I thought about it. It was agonizing, but I thought, I just don't want someone else raising my child.
Sure.
And fortunately, I was in a position where economically I could do it.
Mm.
I did get my pension cut in half because I left before 25.
Right. Right.
But my pension was cut in half, but I was married at that point and still am. Same guy. He was really the right one, because
Yay.
I'm still married to him and we're still happy.
Excellent.
But he was very well paid as a police commander on another major city police department.
Yeah.
And so, I thought I can swing this, and I could, and I did. And I'm really glad I made that decision. But man, it was a wrench at the time.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough.
Yeah.
So, what do you miss the most or least about police work?
Um, wow, let's see. It's kind of funny. As soon as I retired, it was kind of hard, because it's like I retired and went straight into the mom thing. And I thought about it. And I thought, that in my last position, I had, um, a first lieutenant and a bunch of second lieutenants and sergeants and detectives and officers and all these people, sort of under my command. And I could make these decisions and say, I need you to do this, and I'm going to have you do that, and I need this. And then I went immediately from that to being the humble servant of a little tyrant in a pair of diapers, who I was having to, who was running my life. And I had no backup. I'm like, where is my backup? I need help here, because my husband was at work, obviously, and he was a commander. And so he was doing that, where he's on call 24/7 and 365. He worked the long hours and all the craziness. So I was really on my own. And I moved across the country, so I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any friends. I had no support, any of that. So I was just kind of on my own, trying to work my way through all this. And yeah, I did. There were several times I felt like I wanted to call. In our department, we would call it a signal 13. I don't know what your department called it.
Yeah, it was 1017 for officer needs assistance. Yes.
There you go.
That's funny. So you leave police work, and now we're gonna fast forward to the writing. Now,
Yeah.
when did you get bit by the writing bug? When did that happen?
Well, it's kind of funny. We were talking earlier before it started about Jack Carr, fabulous superstar author. But in a sense, I do have something in common with him, in that I always knew I wanted to write. Always did, from the time I was very, very young. And I don't know if this is true of him or not, but for me, my situation is that I felt like I didn't have anything to say as a young person, because what I knew I wanted to write, like, thrillers and action and stuff like that. That's kind of my jam. I knew I wasn't going to be writing romance or cat cozies, or not that there's anything wrong with it. I've read them both. I like all that too, but I knew I wouldn't be writing it. I like, I love action. And so that's what I knew I wanted to write. But I wanted the action that I wrote to be very meaningful. And that's kind of become my hallmark, where, the people who read my books talk about how, they're high octane thrillers, but with a heart. And they have a lot of this emotional component, and they have a lot of, you really get attached to the characters, and they become, so you get so engrossed. So I felt like I didn't know enough about human nature as a young person.
Mhm.
Some authors, I have seen them do it. At 19 years old, they're able to write an amazing book. It becomes a huge bestseller, and it's very emotionally resonant and very complex. That was not me. I felt like I need a lot of life experience before I can write characters with that kind of emotional depth, and before I can tell stories with that kind of emotional depth. And, 22 years with a gun and badge will do that for you. It will give you that, because you see humanity at its best and at its worst.
Right.
I'm sure you can attest to this. You see people do the most beautiful, self-sacrificing, amazing things. And then you also see people who just do cruel, inhumane, disgusting, despicable things. You see all of human nature. And I love people. I'm an extrovert by nature. And so I'm a student of human nature. And so having many years of that, I felt like that was the base that I needed. Even though I knew I always wanted to write, I almost felt like I had to do a detour before I could write meaningful, complex, and well thought out characters.
Yeah, like you were saying, some people can pull it off. I don't know how, but yay for them. That's not me either. I didn't start putting pen to paper till I was a couple of years before I retired from this job, and but unfortunately, I've also seen the writers that are younger, or maybe they just don't have the life experience, trying to write like they have all this, and it's just miserable failures.
Mhm.
And it's because they haven't done any living. And you don't have to be a superstar cop. It's like, be a bartender, be an Uber driver. You're going to meet all kinds of people. You're not going to get any life experience hiding in your basement.
Mhm.
It's just not going to happen. Get a Joe job or a Jane job or whatever, just get out there. And it pays dividends, and
Mhm.
that's one thing that does kind of get my cross sometimes. It's like when the people are trying to write and they're trying to portray themselves a certain way without the credibility,
Mhm.
and what I think it shines right through like a beacon, but hey, that's just me. So so how many books have you written so far?
Actually, my seventh book is coming out on June 1st.
Yep,
So
we
it
will
will
talk
have
about that.
just
Yes.
been published.
Yes.
That is the book that you have, A Killer's
Hmm.
Game.
Yep.
I am busily right now in what's called developmental edits for those who are not writers. Just to sort of clue you in, when you go through a traditional publisher, I'm traditionally published. I do not self-publish. I don't have the skill set, but I'm traditionally published. So when you do that, your publisher will set you up with, first you go through rounds of what are called developmental edits, where they look at the big picture of your story and make sure the plot all kind of hangs together, ask you all the awkward questions. And then you go through copy edits where they fix all the errors. And then you finally go through line edits where they make sure that every single comma is in the right place. And that way, it's supposed to be as clean as possible when it goes to print, so that you don't have all these errors. Although I tell you, every book, sharp-eyed readers manage to
Oh,
spot them.
absolutely. Absolutely.
It's weird.
It's troll ammunition is what it is. It's like I could give a hoot if the comma's in the wrong place or whatever. If it's a good story, you can
Mhm.
forgive a lot.
You you can. You
Yes.
can. So I'm in developmental edits. So I'm going through all that on the sequel to A Killer's Game. It's called A Forgotten Kill, and I'm in dev edits for that. So that actually has a publication date of next March of 2024.
Wow. Okay.
So that'll be my eighth book. And now I can't give all the details yet,
Okay.
but I will tell you that I am also getting ready to sign the biggest contract of my career, and it is for a 2-book deal, completely unrelated.
Okay.
And the first draft of that is due on September 1st of this year.
Oh,
And they're
geez.
looking at that being published in fall of next year. So it looks like next year I'll have 2 books out.
Now,
And
I know you're with Thomas and Mercer, or at least your
yes,
last few books. That's an Amazon imprint.
yes, yes.
Um, let me ask you this.
Mhm,
When did you realize that this whole writing thing is much more than a hobby or something fun to
mhm,
do? This is a very sustainable
mhm.
career for you. And your career is just jumping off. It's like, a
Yes.
SpaceX rocket, which is awesome. I'd love to see it.
Mhm.
When did you first realize? Do you remember like where you were and what you were doing? Is like, holy shit, this could really, this is real.
Yeah, actually, it was when I got the contract with Thomas and Mercer. That was really it. So what happened is, I mean, you'd said you wanted to talk about the series, and so
Yeah.
I have now written 3 series. So the first series is a trilogy, a 3 book. I'm hoping I can make a 4th book in that series one day, but it's a 3 book, and that was a 3 book publishing deal that I have with like a mid-sized publisher. And right at the time I was finishing the 3rd book in that one, and that one's about a homicide detective who works in Phoenix, is what that one's about.
Okay.
And so right when I was finishing up the 3rd book, that publishing house went out of business. They shuttered, they closed down. That happens a lot with mid-size or smaller. This one was actually, I thought I was safe with them though, because they're pretty good sized. And I had distribution. I was in all of the Barnes and Nobles all over the country, and all the libraries and stuff. And I thought, I was stunned when I found out they were closing up shop, because they had a pretty successful imprint and a lot of good authors. So I'm like,
Yeah.
damn. So at that point, I had gotten an agent, and I went to my agent, and she's in New York. She's amazing. And I told her, I said, hey, um, first, let's see if I can get my rights back. And we did manage to get my rights back. And then I said, let's see if we can, if anyone wants to pick this up. Well, it turns out that most publishers do not want to pick up an existing series that's
Right.
already
Yeah.
books in.
Absolutely.
So,
Yep.
yep. And but the good news is though that a lot of them really loved what I wrote, and they're like, hey, we're happy to see anything from Isabella, but make it something new. And so it's like, okay, we have options. And so I went to my agent though, and I said, this time I want a publisher that is so big that they will not fail. And guess
Okay.
what? I got that. I mean, because we were talking about that, because even the big five, they merge,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they're
Yep.
like the big four, and then they cut out an imprint, and everybody, it's like they're constantly reshuffling and stuff. And it was interesting because there was one of the big five was interested in the new character that I created, which is Nina Guerrera,
Mhm.
which is, book one is the Cipher. And there was another big five publisher was actually interested in that. And but that was part of my calculus of deciding to go with Thomas and Mercer. Was I remember saying this to my agent, I'm like, okay, if Amazon shuts down, we're all in trouble. We have way bigger problems than a publishing deal as a country if
Yes. Yes.
Amazon goes under. So and when that's another thing too, I do want to disabuse people of the notion. A lot of people, when they first hear Amazon publishing, they think self-published. No, Amazon, you can do it with that, but they have their own sort of in-house publishing houses,
Yep.
and their mystery and thriller imprint is Thomas and Mercer. They have a romance imprint. They have, I think nonfiction imprint.
Mhm.
They have several different imprints, but and it is a traditional publisher. It's not just digital, because some people mistakenly think it's just digital. It's not. It's not just print on demand or anything. I mean, they do print runs. They can do, hardcover. They do audio books. They do it all like any normal publisher. And it is outstanding. I can attest to the fact that my experience with Thomas and Mercer has been fantastic, and they've done a very, very good job.
Now, how did you get your agent? I mean, how, we
Ah,
all deal with rejection, when it comes to the publishing biz. There's negativity, there's rejection. You kind of have to have a thick skin to make it in this biz, that's for sure. How did that relationship form?
ah. Well, this is the great part. I did it in a way that literally anybody can do it.
Okay.
And what I did was I went to Thriller Fest and I went to Pitch Fest.
Pitch Fest, yep, you bet.
That's how I got my agent. As a matter of fact, if you're interested, I mean, for those who may be listening, um, Thriller Fest is like the premier mystery and thriller
Mhm.
um,
Conference. Yeah.
conference. There we go. Yeah, I do words for a living now. Um, that's the best conference, really. It's always in Manhattan, and so it's very expensive to go there because it is
Yep.
in Manhattan, and it's not cheap. But it's like I made the conscious decision when I decided I wanted to make this, something more than just a hobby. I thought I got to treat this like a business, and I've got to spend the money, and I invested. And the first time I went was in 2017. And I'll go ahead and tell you so that people can sort of plan
Sure.
financially. I spent a total of about $4,000.
Oh yeah,
That
with
was for
travel and everything else,
that was
hotels,
for the
food.
flight,
Oh,
that was the
absolutely.
hotel, food, and then paying to be in the conference. And
Yep.
then um, I also paid for like recordings of all the sessions and stuff. I mean, but it was, to me, it was an investment. It was a huge investment. You could do it cheaper. You could find someone else to room with you. You could, take red eye flights, find someone else to room with you, and just be very selective about, which panels you went to or
Sure.
something like that. I mean, there's ways to do it cheaper, but I went ahead. And also part of it is you pay a separate fee to go to Pitch Fest. That year I went to Pitch Fest, I went to Craft Fest, and I went to Thriller Fest. Separate fees for each thing. So that
Right.
was about the most you would pay. You could get away cheaper. So I went to Pitch Fest, and I did pitch there. They have about probably about 30 to 40 agents, and they're all like really good New York literary agents. And I knew that that's what I wanted. I wanted one that also had experience making film and television deals because, again, with the complete confidence of total ignorance, I figured, well, why wouldn't I try to get a movie deal for my books? Because, yeah, that happens all the time. Again, I had no idea. I didn't know. No one told me it was impossible, so I did it. But I did pitch, and I ended up, there were actually 4 agents that expressed an interest.
Okay.
And I ended up choosing Liza Fleisig from the Liza Royce agency. There we go. Speak.
Okay.
And but she goes every year, and she's always looking for clients. I mean, you can pitch to her just like I did. I was just a nameless face that got in line. One thing I will tell you about Liza is that she is extremely supportive of those in law enforcement and first responders. And the minute I told her that I had retired from law enforcement, she was like, I will read what you have, just
Wow.
right off the bat. Most agents are just like, yeah, send me a,
Right. Exactly.
she's
Yeah.
like, she's like, I am so respectful of everyone who has sacrificed like that. Military, police, paramedics, any first responder. She's like, I will, with all respect, I will read what you have to say. I will, look at your writing and your proposal and all that. So it's a huge advantage right there. I knew she would do it. And
Mhm.
by that point, I'd actually already had one book published. And so I was able to show her a completed book.
Sure.
She read it during her lunch break and then got back to me, and she's like, oh my gosh, I have to represent you. I have to. It's
That's
a
awesome.
must. Yep.
Damn.
And
So
so
you
I mean,
never went through like the 50 or 60 rejection letters. None of
no,
that?
I'm sorry. Do not throw rocks at me. That was not my experience. But of the 30 agents, or 30 or 40 agents, there were only 4 though that were
Sure.
interested and followed up and wanted and were interested in signing me. But the funny thing is, though, see, I kind of got all the rejection out of the way all in one fell swoop, like all at once, right? You
Okay.
know, and it wasn't, and I didn't have the sting of it because there were four who were interested, but
That's
it shows
awesome.
you there were others who weren't. So,
Very good. Well, let's talk
yeah,
about the Cipher. That's the Nina
yes,
Guerrera series. Yeah, I was
yes,
looking on Amazon. It has almost 43,000 reviews. That's huge. That
it
was
is.
published in November of 2020, and it's still
Mhm.
5,222 rank in the Kindle
Yep.
store, which is
Yes.
also amazing. And Netflix has optioned the Cipher, and they have J-Lo, Jennifer
Mhm.
Lopez, is gonna be the main character.
Mhm.
Now, when you're writing, are you thinking of a specific actor or actress while you're writing a book?
Actually, I do, and this is a fun thing, and it's I think it's my husband's superpower. What he does is he helps me. I refer to it as dream casting.
Okay,
So he's really tuned into the visual media, the television and movies and stuff like that. He's really I don't really have that much time to watch because I'm always writing.
sure.
He is really plugged into all that. So what I'll do is I'll tell him, okay, I need a Latina character, and she's got to be like really tough, and she's got to do this. I kind of describe it, and then he starts thinking right away, and he'll start scrolling, and like through their IMDb files
Sure,
or whatever,
sure.
he'll pop up their photos and stuff, and it really you look and you kind of see the different roles that they played. And if they played a role that looks like the kind of role that I'm looking for, I'll say, yeah, that's it. And then I'll take that image and I can put it like up on my computer. And I do that for all of my characters.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And it's kind of all my main characters and
Yeah,
even some of the minor ones. And it really helps me to embody the role in my writing. And it also shows the genius of actors because they can really transform themselves into a role. The brilliant ones, the great ones do
sure.
this. And it really does help. And it's so funny because when I was writing the first series, the Miranda Cruz series, apparently the one of my I had like an older grizzled homicide detective, and I guess I knew who the actor was, but I guess I wrote it so well that one time I was at a speaking engagement and someone actually guessed. They're like, "Oh, I know who the actor," and they were right. I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" But that shows how helpful it is for me to not just physically describe the person, but get into their mindset of how would they react if this,
Right.
that, or the other happened. So
See, I
yeah.
think I see the value, as far as when you're writing and you have a picture of the person and you have it in
Mhm.
your mind's eye, and it makes it fun though too.
It
It
does.
it can't be all drudgery. It can't be, it's
Yep.
like chained to your computer for 8 hours a day or 10 or whatever, you're doing. You got to maybe change locations, change times, do stuff to try and make it a little bit fun. Obviously you have to get the work done,
Yes.
but you know, I'm all for having fun. I still have a heart of like a kid, and a lot of people do, and it's like that's perfect. I absolutely love that.
And
So,
actually, what inspired the cipher was a real life police case that our department was involved in.
okay,
Um, I'll back up just a quick second
sure.
before I talk about that, but just to explain how the cipher just became this phenomenon. That was the first book I published with Thomas and Mercer, and as you said, you can see all the reviews, and it has just exploded.
It
And what I
has, yeah.
did not expect was it's now published in 23 languages around the world, and it has made bestseller lists in other countries. People are just responding to this story in a way that I had no idea when I was writing it. I mean, I knew what I felt inside.
Yeah.
I felt a lot of really strong feelings, but I had no idea that people were going to respond like this. It has just really, really people really reacted. But I will say this. So, and, people who are in law enforcement, or write about law enforcement really appreciate this, because people have wondered, was there a case that inspired this? And there kind of was, in the sense of, so when I was in the Fairfax County Police Department in the 90s, there was the Beltway sniper case. And a lot of people, even when I am speaking virtually around the world, people in other countries have even heard of this case.
Sure.
Because it made international news,
Absolutely.
when the two guys were going around picking people off.
Yep.
So Fairfax County had one of the cases. As a matter of fact, the case that Fairfax County had was the one where the FBI analyst was killed when she was coming out of Home Depot. And at the time, I was a lieutenant, a first lieutenant, and I was in charge of the PIO for our department. So I was the department spokesperson, but I also ran the PIO office at that time. And so when the woman was shot in Fairfax, I was the one who went out to the scene and spoke to the media at the scene. Gotcha. So you can actually find footage of me, addressing the media, in my uniform. But that was what I was doing. But because I was sort of running the public interface part of that, I had kind of a front row seat to all of the insanity that was going on. And there was, in Montgomery County, they had the JOC and the JIC, and we would all get together in the alphabet soup of agencies because it was in the nation's capital. It was all through the Beltway. It was considered, this is before 9/11, if you remember, this was kind of a terrorist event, and that's how it was being treated. Sure. And even the CIA showed up. I mean, everybody showed up. Wow. It was just amazing. It was the NSA and the FBI. The FBI had like a full contingent of agents out there, and we were, they were all there. DEA, I mean, I could go on and on, but just imagine every single federal agency you can think of. There was literally more than 100 law enforcement officers crammed into the JOC, and another 100 crammed into the JIC, the information center. And we were exchanging information because we had to coordinate what we're saying to the public. So I was really, really able to see kind of how the investigation was going and how we were putting it together and all that. But what did that have to do with the book that I wrote? Well, I didn't want to write a book with these two guys just going around randomly picking people off. But what inspired me was the older of the two guys, John Allen Muhammad, the older of the two. He would leave these coded messages and weird riddles and like visual clues and things at the scene. Or he would contact the media and have them give out these coded messages, because his whole thing was he wanted to terrorize the public. He wanted everyone afraid. And that's why, it came out later after he was arrested where, he was making it a point. He wanted to arrest he wanted to kill male, female, every race, every religion, every, old, young, all of it, because his message was no one is safe and I will get everyone. And he wanted to do people, to kill people when they were going about their normal business, putting gas in their car, mowing their lawn, going shopping, going to school. Yeah. He was, that was his point. So I thought about that. It was such a life-changing experience for me to be involved in that case. And I thought, if I wanted to sort of to give readers a feeling of how terrifying that was for the public and how upsetting it was. And then also the whole thing of trying to run an investigation when the public has been sucked into it. And then also all the riddles and clues and weirdness. So those are the components that I borrowed from that case, but then I changed it to like a more standard kind of a serial killer. And then I thought to myself, well, if he were going to try to engage the public in this day and age nowadays, how would he do it? And the answer is social media. So this killer uses all the weird clues and riddles and stuff, but he puts them out on social media and gets everybody all cranked up. And instead of just going around the Beltway, he goes all around the United States. And so that is kind of what I had set up for this. And I had a lot of fun setting up these challenging riddles and codes and things.
Right.
And people love it, though. People really do respond.
Very cool. A killer's game that is coming out
Yes.
June 1st.
Yes.
Also, give us a quick synopsis of that.
Well, that one also uses, it's funny because I hadn't really done like the riddles and codes since the cipher. So there were 2 other books that finished out the Nina Guerrero series. And then it was time to start a new series. And I thought, I still love puzzles and codes and things. What inspired the new book that has just come out, A Killer's Game, is escape rooms. I have noticed an explosion in popularity of escape rooms.
Oh, yeah.
Even my own son, the little Miho, who is now a teenager, he actually went to an escape room, and I got to hear all about it. I didn't go in there with him, but I got to hear all about it. And I noticed that they're taking the world by storm. I mean, cities all over the world, they have these escape rooms. And I thought, okay, this is a phenomenon that people find interesting. And I thought, well, what if there was a real escape room that someone set up that you literally had to solve these puzzles and clues and riddles and codes, or you would be killed. And I thought, okay, that's good. And then I thought, well, instead of just going through it by yourself, what if you were trapped in there with a bunch of hired assassins? Okay, great. Let's do that too, because it's more fun. But then I had to think to myself, okay, who could possibly survive something like that? And then that's when I did some research and I realized that starting in 2017, that's when the first fully qualified female Army Rangers graduated from RASP. That's the Ranger School 1 and 2. And that is the first time, fully qualified, scrolled, and the 75th Ranger Regiment. And I thought, oh man, I have to celebrate these women. And actually in 2019, the first of these women were actually in live combat. So I thought, wow, what if there was an Army Ranger, someone who literally went through this, and then she, got out of the military and then became an FBI agent? Because that does happen. People from the military do join the FBI. People from the military join the police. It's kind of it's very common. So I thought, well, I would have her join the FBI. And then I put her in New York City. That's the I Love New York t-shirt I have on now.
There we go.
Because I've had to study. I've had to go to New York a couple times to make sure I get the setting right. But I love New York City. So I was able to set it there and have her work there out of 26 Fed, which is that's the big federal building in Lower Manhattan. And that's where she works out of. And so I thought, yep, that's what I'm going to do. And people also have been loving it. I am absolutely thrilled. It's taken off. It's
number 43 in the Kindle store right now.
Yes. Yeah,
which
overall.
Is, overall, like in the entire Kindle store, out of how many millions of books? I mean, that's amazing.
It's insane. Yes. I mean, it's number great. 1 police procedural and number 1, crime thriller. I mean, all these other things. It's really, really exciting. And what I'm most excited about is the rating. It's overall, it's got I forget, I think a couple of thousand reviews now, right? 20.
Oh yeah, let me take a look here. It's got 2,498 reviews, and it's great at a 4.4 right now.
I was going to say it's the 4.4. That's what I'm so excited about. What that means, 4.4 out of 5 stars, means that people are really, really enjoying the story. It is very exciting, and I'm very humbled that I wrote something that when people read it, they just love it. And I mean, that to me is very exciting. And another good thing is that Hollywood has also called about that story. Okay. So stay tuned. I don't know what is going to happen with it at this point, but there has been some interest. So people are raising their hands. But if you think about it, it kind of sounds like it would be a fun, movie to make, like a real life escape room.
Oh, and, absolutely.
My editor called it Squid Game meets Criminal Minds. So, hey, right?
When you were writing this book, did you know it was going to be a series, like when you kicked it off?
Yeah, I did, but I tend to write limited series. I
Okay.
don't write like there's not going to be 27 books in the series. My series, because what I do is I tend to have a very steep character arc. And so I can only manage that in like 3 or 4 books at the
Mm,
most.
okay.
Because when my character finishes her journey, she is very different from when she started. So
Right.
when you do that, it's kind of hard to sustain that level of character growth for 27 books.
And then when people force that, it's jumping the shark. It gets to that point where you're like, come on. It's like, I know you're selling a ton of books, and you have your dedicated fan base, but it's almost a disservice when you keep a series going further than it should.
Yeah.
I'm glad you do that. That's outstanding. So this book and other books that you write or you're going to write, do you intentionally try to put like a message or have something as say they're done reading the book and you want them to have a certain feeling when they're done reading your book?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. But I know better than to preach. I never do that. But what I do is it's more of a thematic thing. And so like in the cipher, and I have gotten this now because I've done like media interviews in various countries around the world.
Hmm.
Um, so this is kind of a universal thing. The message, one of the main messages that I have in the cipher is resilience. And that comes from my time as a cop. See, this is where I
Sure.
don't know how I could write if I hadn't been a cop.
Right.
Because one of the things that, and I try to explain this to people, is one of the things that always touched me when I would see trauma victims and crime victims and their loved ones. Some of them, the crime would devastate them for the rest of their lives. It's like they would never get over it. Others somehow managed to take a horrible situation and turn it around and make something positive out of it. And that is what I wanted to celebrate. I'm not blaming the ones that couldn't, mind you,
Right.
because,
Absolutely.
but for those who do, I wanted to celebrate. And so my character, Nina Guerrera, is someone who is a trauma survivor herself, but she decided to get into law enforcement. And she started as a Fairfax County police officer,
There we
interestingly
go.
enough, then became an FBI agent. But her whole thing is that she wanted to get into law enforcement because she wanted to protect others from the kind of crime that she had to suffer. And so it was very important to put that out. And what's interesting is that people have totally connected with that. And another kind of, if I have a moment, I was
Go
going to
ahead.
share something. If I do,
Sure.
okay, I don't know what kind of editing you need to do, but I have gotten a lot of response from Ukraine. My book is
Okay.
published in Ukrainian, and in a way, it's kind of become something of like an anthem for young Ukrainian women who you can see, like if you look on my Instagram account, they will, several of them have, held up the books
Oh,
in
cool.
Ukrainian,
Yeah.
and they talk about that it's inspiring them and stuff, to be resilient in the face of adversity. And obviously things are difficult in Ukraine. And I was really another thing I was very honored by is my Ukrainian publisher, because it's, you get different publishers in different
Sure.
countries and different languages. And my Ukrainian publisher they had to scale back dramatically on the books that they were publishing for obvious reasons,
Right.
power cuts and all these other things, and who knows. But anyway, so they had to limit the books that they were going to be able to do, but they chose to continue my series, and they have actually now published all 3 books in the Guerrera series are now out in Ukrainian. And they are just the Instagrammers, the Ukrainian bookstagrammers are, they're sharing the story and stuff like that. I mean, I just, I am touched that people are finding a meaning and understanding the message and relating to it. I never would have anticipated when I was writing the story that it would have that kind of resonance. but it does, and it has in other people, in other circumstances. I've had other people tell me that they're trauma survivors, and they found strength in Nina and how she found strength, and they find her to be inspirational. So that to me is very meaningful.
You know what? I think that's a good place for us to stop.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. If people want to find you, not in a nefarious way, but if they
Yes.
want to connect with you, where do they go?
The best place is to go to my website, isabellamaldonado.com.
Okay.
And that pretty much has everything you need to know about me on there.
That's got all the links for your socials and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yes, it has the links for my socials and
Okay.
and my agent.
Okay. Well, I will put that up on the show notes so everybody can go visit.
I think you have photos, right, that I gave you. So
Yeah, you did. Yep. All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you so much. I do appreciate all of your time. This has been a lot of fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, we ran into overtime. I don't know how the heck you're going to edit this, but I figure you'll figure it out.
I'll figure it out. No problem.
Very good. Thank you.